Hey guys, at the end of this video, I'm announcing a small event that I'm hosting in real life where you can come hang out with me, my wife Taylor, my scholar friend Joe, and learn some things with us for a little while. So more on that at the end. Atheists just don't want to submit to God. That's their problem. We know it, they know it, the Bible says it. God has made his existence plain to them, as it says in Romans 1, but they choose to turn away from him because of their foolishness or pride. We've all heard this Christian narrative before, and a lot of us, myself included, can get a little hung up on showing that no, we don't secretly think God exists. I'm not an atheist just because I'm too dumb or narcissistic to be a Christian. I have reasons that I think are pretty good, or else I wouldn't be an atheist. There are some seemingly straightforward questions that believers like to ask atheists, though, that can be pretty hard to answer without giving the believers who get caught up in their preconceived notions about atheists exactly what they want. Would you submit to God if evidence wasn't an issue? Of course, if atheists answer no, we reinforce the preconceived Christian narrative that atheists just don't want to submit to God for irrational, emotional reasons.
If the biblical God came down from heaven right now and stood in front of me and proved to me that he exists, I still would not worship him.
Even if there's great intellectual evidence for the existence of God, if my emotions don't line up with the idea of actually having to worship him if he exists, then I'll never believe in him. If I were to ask you the question, is Christianity true? And if it was, would you believe in Christ? And you said no, well, then obviously it's an emotional issue. In John chapter 6, you had Jesus feeding the 5,000, this great miracle, and yet many different disciples turned away from him because they did not like his claim to be God. The question is, are you discounting God because of lack of intellectual evidence, or is it because I don't want to worship somebody outside of myself?
On the other hand, if atheists answer yes, we make it sound like we would endorse a specific Christian theology if God were real. But many of us wouldn't. I myself would answer this question yes. And no. It depends on a few things. To answer this question well, I need to know what it means for God to be real in the first place. Does God necessarily deserve submission and worship? Is everything God has made and done necessarily preferable or desirable if he exists? To a Christian, these questions might have obvious answers, but I, as an atheist, evaluate these questions from a fundamentally different perspective. A perspective which certain Christians who ask these tough questions don't consider before concluding, aha, I knew atheists were just prideful and irrational. When evaluating whether someone deserves my support or praise, I basically tally their actions to determine a ratio of commendable ones to objectionable ones. This is how I evaluate people, and it's how I think most atheists evaluate hypothetical gods. It's through this method that atheists might determine that God isn't perfectly merciful, loving, or worthy of their submission and praise. The God of the Bible, as I'm sure you've all heard by now, inflicts a pretty insane amount of suffering on his creation. He ordered the slaughter of countless men, women, and children in the Old Testament. He condones slavery. I mean, Isaiah 45:7 even says God creates suffering, woe, disaster, or evil, depending on the translation. Even if all of that can be explained away somehow, it appears that God at least allows plenty of suffering when he could prevent it. Disease, natural disasters, and even widespread abuse within his own earthly institutions. For example, a recent Irish state inquiry uncovered thousands of allegations of sexual abuse at primarily Catholic-run schools in Ireland. Over a dozen articles have been published on this, and, of course, people of different perspectives portray this story differently. While left-leaning sources tend to emphasize how grisly reports of abuse are, right-leaning sources are careful to emphasize that these reports are alleged. Small differences in phrasing like this can easily influence public perception. I was able to easily compare these perspectives, of course, on Ground News, a news aggregator app and website I actually use every day. Go check them out at ground.news/skeptic. Their My News Bias dashboard lets you keep track of your personal reading habits and shows you your news blind spots. This feature keeps me mindful of how my news consumption can be skewed by the type of sources and narratives I gravitate toward most. Luckily, Ground News makes it easy to diversify how I stay up to date. I can follow my favorite topics like Christianity and atheism while still having access to the full spectrum of perspectives, ensuring I have a more well-rounded understanding of any issue. I encourage you to check it out at ground.news/skeptic, or you can scan this QR code to try a better way to read the news. Subscribe through my link for 40% off the same unlimited access Vantage subscription that I use. Don't stay siloed in a single perspective. Use the incredible tools Ground News provides to see all sides and stay fully informed every time you read the news. Now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Basically, atheists like myself observe the outcomes of God's supposed actions and judge him accordingly, which is why so many of us would say, no, I wouldn't worship God. If he does exist, he's clearly cruel. Christians necessarily come at this from a different perspective, though. Sure, God allows suffering, they might say, but he somehow uses this for good, even if we can't observe or understand how.
The atheist seems to think that if God has morally sufficient reasons for permitting the evils that occur, these reasons must be evident to us. But there's absolutely no grounds for that assumption. On the contrary, given our limits in time and space, intelligence and insight, we shouldn't expect to see the reasons why God permits every evil. Take, for example, our being historically limited. Evils which might appear gratuitous within our limited frame of reference might be seen to be justly permitted within God's wider frame of reference.
I would say this reasoning is completely self-defeating, of course, because if we are ultimately unable to evaluate God's actions as good or bad, we're unable to determine that he's ultimately good. I actually have a whole video about this, so go watch that after this one's over. So, when I'm asked the question, would you submit to God if evidence wasn't an issue? I think, well, if I don't just assume God is worthy of submission and use observation and reason to make that determination, then no. But if I assume that I can't use observation and reason to assess God's worthiness and that I have to assume God is worthy of worship, then yes. As you might imagine, I'm not thrilled to give that answer of yes, because I think the logic it takes to arrive at that answer is nonsensical. So even though a Christian might think better of my intellectual integrity if I give that answer, it's one I feel compromises that integrity. To add another complication to this, in a lot of Christians' theology, God sends you to eternal hell if you don't submit to him. Now, though my own reasoning leads me to believe that damning anyone to such an afterlife is contemptible and makes a God unworthy of submission, I would still submit to that God if I knew him to exist. I don't want to burn for all eternity, and if my defiance of God does nothing to positively affect the fate I or anyone else would experience, then there would be no point to it. But there again, that's not an answer I want to give. I don't want to appear to endorse that perverted system of justice by effectively saying, yeah, if it was real, I would totally think everyone deserves to burn in hell, so I'd make sure to tell God I'm sorry for existing, even though he's the one who made me in the first place. Of course, a potential solution to this whole dilemma is just to explain what I have here, or ask questions about what God existing or evidence not being an issue really entails in this hypothetical. Unfortunately, this doesn't always work because some folks seemingly want to confirm their preconceived notions about atheists so badly that they don't listen even when you explain your perspective.
Evidence isn't your problem. Because even if it was true, you wouldn't come in line. You wouldn't yield your heart and life to Christ. That's a different issue. From my personal experience, more people are turning their back on God because of heart issues than evidence issues.
Atheists can be that way too, by the way. I've experienced it myself, even as another atheist. Not a specific dig at Christians, just people can suck. Another question that puts atheists in a tough spot is, do you want Christianity to be true? Again, if I answer yes, it makes it sound like I think a world where Christianity is true is necessarily preferable to one where it's not true, and I don't think that. But if I answer no, it sounds like I'm an atheist because I just foolishly don't believe in things I don't like. I could answer this question yes or no, depending on what Christianity being true means. Does it mean that hell exists and that all the non-Christians who have ever existed, so most people who have ever existed, burn for eternity there? In that case, no way. That's one of the worst possible worlds imaginable. Does it mean that the doctrine of universalism is true and that everyone goes to heaven for a blissful afterlife? If so, then yes, that would be awesome. There are so many versions of Christianity that Christianity being true could mean a huge variety of things. When asked this, I always ask for the specific definition of Christianity being used, because otherwise, I honestly cannot answer the question. Usually, the person asking the question will define Christianity according to their own denomination's interpretation. Specifics like this do help, but they still don't make answering easy. As with the last question, the perspective from which I evaluate what is desirable determines my answer. If I can use my observation and reason to conclude that suffering is undesirable, and it happens that Christianity's truth would mean that more suffering would exist, then I'd say no. I don't want it to be true. I don't want there to be more suffering, whether in this life or an afterlife. Hell doesn't even have to enter the picture for me to say no thank you to Christianity either. Imagine that Christianity being true entails that God chose evolution as his way to create humanity. Can you even fathom how sadistic he would have to be to choose that? Trillions upon trillions of organisms have suffered and died in their struggle against a merciless torrent of selection pressures. I sincerely hope there is no being in existence malicious enough to have decided that was a good idea. However, Christians necessarily approach this differently. Yes, a lot of people are eternally tortured, or trillions of organisms have died so humanity could evolve, but that is actually a part of God's perfect love and justice. It may seem harsh to us, but remember, we are in no place to judge God's ways. So when a Christian asks this question, it asks more than it initially appears to ask, I think. The question is not simply, do you want Christianity as you see it to be true? It's really, do you want Christianity as I see it, as a system of perfect love and justice regardless of any contraindication, to be true?
God nor the rest of us are the least bit self-conscious because of an individual who says they wouldn't worship this incredible King of love who's offering this incredible opportunity of life.
As with the first question we discussed, if I have to assume a Christian perspective on this question, then of course I'd have to answer, yes, I want Christianity to be true. From my own perspective, though, the Christian logic which deems God's apparent sadism to be loving is just nonsensical and pretty heartless. So I'm not keen to endorse that perspective with an answer of yes. In the hands of a Christian looking to confirm a bias that the Christian perspective is logical and atheists are just stubborn, emotional, or egotistical, these questions make for an effective means to that end. Still, though, for Christians genuinely seeking to understand an atheist perspective, these questions can be useful, as long as both parties are willing to engage charitably and patiently. Such a dialogue on this topic is the less common variety, though, which I think is the ultimate reason why these questions are so difficult for atheists to answer. Okay, I'm excited to announce a little live event I'm putting on. I have rented out a small movie theater for a showing of The Exorcist, followed by a talk from this channel's favorite religion scholar, Dr. Joseph Laycock. The Exorcist is one of the most influential films on American religion ever. Like, it might be the reason why most people believe in demonic possession in the US today. And Joe is going to teach us all about the film and its cultural influence, which will be absolutely fascinating. I'm putting this on at an Alamo Drafthouse Cinema in Austin, Texas on Sunday, October 13th. Check out the event page for the address. It's a dine-in theater with a full bar, great beer on tap, and excellent food options, so you can also purchase dinner and drinks if you would like. It's not like theater food and drinks, by the way. Like, it's good food and drinks. This is my favorite movie theater, so I'm really excited for this. Space is very limited, so get your tickets quickly. I think we're going to sell out the theater, and if and when we do, I'm going to book the theater again for a similar event, but on Rosemary's Baby, a horror film Joe calls the launch pad for the satanic panic. I think that'd be pretty fun. So come hang out with me, Taylor, and Joe, watch a scary movie, and learn something in the process. Get your tickets through the link in the description. I can't wait to see you guys in Austin on October 13th. Thank you for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. Thank you to everyone who has made it possible for me to start producing courses and in-person events. This is really exciting. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support. If you want to hear more from me, then subscribe. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.